You haven't threatened yet to not start podcasting. Some of the others are nervous that you might not start podcasting because you aren't saying you won't.
They'd feel better if I said I wouldn't turn on the mic?
Everyone who sits there says they aren't going to do it. But then they do. It's what we've all come to expect. It's why there's so many goddamn podcasts out there. Mayor Johns is sick
She gets it.
of listening to your shitty talk shows.
She doesn't get it, in fact. Welcome back to Science Fiction Book Club, a podcast for bookworms and stargazers. In every episode, we dive into the pages of our favorite science fiction novels to break down the big ideas, ask the nerdy questions, and maybe learn a little bit about ourselves along the way.
That's right.
Welcome to this first episode of Wool.
That's right. I'm so excited.
Yeah.
This is the first book of our second season, Obssa.
Yep.
We've already released a little bonus conversation about the TV show.
Yes.
And we're going to be doing, I think, quite a bit of comparing and contrasting.
That's right.
On today's conversation.
That's
But before we get too far ahead of ourselves,
Yes.
let's get some quick housekeeping out of the way, starting, of course, with a spoiler warning.
Yeah.
As we stated, we have watched Silo, the TV show.
Yeah.
We have now read the first 17 chapters of Wool, the book.
Yeah.
So, if you have not done both of those things, stop listening, go do them first, and then come back and listen to the conversation.
Or, if you're my brother, listen to our episodes.
No.
And then go back and read and watch. So take it however you wish to, whether it's book before adaptation, adaptation before book, podcast episodes.
Before anything.
Before anything. But just know, lots of spoilers here for both the book and the show.
That's right.
You have been forewarned, and hopefully you're as excited to join our conversation as we are to have it.
Yeah, for sure. And as always, folks, we encourage you to read along with us. We encourage you to share your thoughts. So email us, sci-fi-book-club-pod@lowerparty.com. You can also join the Patreon for free, patreon.com/sci-fi-book-club-pod. We post free reading guides there. We post discussion questions, as well as bonus clips and blooper clips that don't make it onto the main public feed.
Yep.
The Patreon is also where you will find the link to join our Discord to keep the nerdy sci-fi discussions going with the fellow readers in our community. We have a really lovely group in there.
That's right.
And we're all big sci-fi fans.
Yeah.
And the hope is that we're all reading along with each other.
That's right.
I'm talking about it. And look, if you're like, oh my gosh, I didn't write any of that down, can you please repeat that? Don't worry. Check the show notes, all the links to the Patreon, Discord, everything's down there.
So with all of that out of the way, for this episode, here is our game plan. First, we'll, as always, summarize the chapters from today's reading. That's the first 17 chapters of Wool. And then we'll share our impressions and predictions. And of course, we'll wrap up with a deep dive into our sci-fi analysis.
And of course, as you said, Obssa, this is a book club. It doesn't function without other folks in the club reading along with us. So stick around until the end of the episode, where we will be sharing some comments and observations from listeners like you.
And with that, let's take a quick break and we'll jump into today's reading.
All right, folks, welcome back. Let's get into a summary of today's reading, chapters 1 through 17. This book is actually divided into parts, part 1 through 5. And so we're going to summarize sort of part by part rather than chapter by chapter. The chapters are pretty small. So part 1 is 7 short chapters that introduce us to the final days of Sheriff Holston.
Yeah.
And throughout this part, we cut between the present day with Holston and flashbacks to this tragic story that we learn about with his wife, Allison. In the present day storyline, Holston declares his desire to go outside, which is a cardinal sin in this silo society. And it's one that he knows very well will condemn him to cleaning the cameras outside,
right,
which is akin to death because it's a post-apocalyptic world outside.
Yeah.
No one can survive. So as he spends a final night in lockup, we come to understand that his wife had also voluntarily gone out to clean 3 years earlier And he's been struggling with the whys of it all ever since. It's
Right.
been eating away at him for years.
Yeah.
Through his observations of the giant view screen that shows the outside world here in the cell, and through his conversations with the mayor who comes to visit him, we get this like really great sense of the paranoia that has clearly wormed its way into Holston's mind.
Yeah.
And it's obvious that this paranoia comes from whatever occurred 3 years ago with his wife.
Yeah.
His wife, Allison, had been questioning the reality and the truth of their existence in the silo, and all of that has been eating away at Holston until this very moment where he himself has decided to go out.
Right.
Now, we also flash back to 3 years ago where we actually learn what occurred with Holston's computer whiz of a wife, clackety clack clack, hacking those servers.
Yeah.
Allison had begun uncovering old deleted files from before some great uprising and great purge of their history.
Right.
She's been uncovering what seemed to be files someone had buried intentionally.
Yeah. And sharing details on how to do the same kind of data recovery.
Incredible.
Yeah.
She's kind of a rogue hacker, you know?
Oh, yeah. She's great. Yeah.
Which is great. These discoveries are leading Allison to question the truth of their reality, as I said earlier, and it eventually leads to a very public meltdown in the cafeteria in front of everybody where she declares, I want to go outside.
Yep.
Allison tells Holston on her last night while she's in the holding cell that she had found a program in these files that can alter the view of the screens that show the outside world, and she has begun to believe that this is all a lie.
Right.
The outside world is actually a paradise. We're being trapped in here by nefarious forces who are showing us a fake view of an apocalyptic world. I promise you, we should all be outside, and it's safe to go outside. I'm going to go outside and prove it.
And then I'm going to come back and get you, is what she says.
Yes.
You know? Yeah.
Yes. That's what Allison believes, and that's the ideas that have been worming their way into Holston's head for 3 years now.
Right.
Now, in the final chapters of part 1 here, we jump back to the present day where Holston suits up and he exits the silo, and lo and behold, Obssa, he sees a lush green landscape, birds in the sky, grass everywhere. It's a paradise.
Right. Clouds part, there's a rainbow. It's truly lovely. It's
oh
a
my
wonderful.
Goodness.
Yeah.
Allison was right. This is incredible. He's jubilant. He goes over to clean those damn cameras.
Yeah.
And then he sets off after his wife to find her out in this paradise world.
Right.
Alas, suddenly his view goes dark. It turns out what he was seeing was just a projection, a fake projection inside his helmet. And it is actually a barren and deadly landscape out there. And he succumbs to the deadly gases in the air and ends up actually, it's really tragic, sort of crawling and dying right next to the body of his wife.
Right.
Both on that hill, right in view of the cameras.
Right.
And that's part 1.
Notably, he did take his helmet off at the very end there.
Yes.
So, and as I recall, he looked at the helmet and he noted that the screen that the helmet offers to the outside world was not in fact glass. Like it was a projector screen. You know, whether he had the language to describe it or not, he could see clearly that, or he could tell that one couldn't see clearly through the glass there, and that does inform our understanding of this world that they find themselves in. It does in fact appear to be toxic to life.
Yes, that is seemingly, for us as the reader, that is the truth.
That is the
truth. It is toxic out there. It is barren. Yeah. And the screens in the silo are presumably showing the truth.
Right.
And maybe Allison was wrong.
Right. So kind of an interesting little bit of kind of validation of what is otherwise the conspiracy here.
Yeah. I will say a great way to start a book.
I totally agree. Yeah. And we move on to part 2, which covers the next set of chapters, 8 to 17, wherein we get to follow Mayor Johns and Deputy Marnes as they take this really arduous journey down to the bottom of the silo in an effort to recruit Juliet Nichols as the new sheriff. As of course, Sheriff Holston has succumbed to death, as we all must. There's a lot of death talk. A lot of death talk in these chapters, I will say.
There is, yeah.
And we'll
it's looming and ever present.
It's looming and ever present. And it's very clearly on Mayor John's mind as we encounter encounter her in these chapters. In any case, as they make their way, they make a couple of pit stops. One at the nursery level to meet with Juliet's father, Peter, who ends up revealing to us that he hasn't seen his daughter since the tragic death of his wife and son.
Ooh, yeah.
And it adds a bit of nuance to the relationship between Juliet and her father, who are, of course, estranged, but there's of course still a great affection
Yeah.
on at least his part, as far as we know, towards her.
Yes.
And they also make a second stop at IT, and we get to see some of the politics of life in the silo brought to the forefront. IT has this weird kind of tenuous relationship with the mayor and the rest of the silo, wherein they have a little bit of a privileged position. And the tensions between the head of IT, Bernard, and the mayor are really quite evident here. He is pretty obviously an unlikable character,
Yeah.
to say the very least.
Yeah. Some might say antagonistic.
A bit of an antagonistic character, indeed. And it's also clear that he is very unhappy with the mayor's choice for the next sheriff, who is, of course, Juliet. And he's got his own beef with Juliet because she has apparently been stealing from IT, this heat tape. And we also get a sense of maybe a little bit of classism on his part to members of the silo below the upper level, essentially.
Yes.
Finally, they make it down to the down deep, and Mayor Johns and Marnes manage to somehow convince Juliet to take the role. It is with the caveat that they promise to power down the silo, as she has been campaigning and just lobbying for some proactive work to repair the generator, essentially.
Yeah.
Obviously, all of the life in the silo is dependent on it, and Juliet is a preeminent engineer. She understands the risks of not doing this kind of maintenance for the generator, and it is the condition that she requires to, in fact, take the job. And we basically continue to follow Johns and Marnes in a little bit of a strange and increasingly sexually tense journey on their way back up. And it finally tips over. They kiss. They do a little more than kiss, from what I recall.
Yes. Okay.
There's a moment when
the cup runneth over, shall we say?
That's right. And there's a bit of a romantic intrigue in this latter set of chapters.
Yep.
And they also make their final pit stop, essentially, at the nursery for what was presumably a little bathroom break for Mayor Johns, but in fact leads us to the end of this section with the third and final death for this block of chapters, with Mayor Johns, who has been apparently poisoned by the water in Marnes's canteen.
Interesting.
Little curious there.
That's right.
And we also see Juliet successfully, following this, complete the repair of the aging silo generator.
And that's chapters 1 through 17, parts 1 and 2.
Yeah.
Of Wool by Hugh Howey.
Yeah.
What are you thinking so far? How are you feeling? Let's get into our impressions.
Yeah. There's a lot to unpack here, definitely. How do we begin? So I think the thing that we are both finding essentially impossible is to not compare the book to the television adaptation.
Yeah, impossible.
And I think there are absolutely merits to both. The book has some really strong qualities. The adaptation does as well. Maybe edges out, hard to say. Lots of, lots of strengths to both. But I am enjoying these first 17 chapters. I think Hugh Howey does a pretty solid job setting up, this world of the silo, the dynamic between a few of these characters, and a little bit of a conspiracy, a little bit of a mystery.
Mm-hmm.
Though I will say, maybe not it's a little puzzling. Maybe not the strongest one so far, given we seem to know quite a lot already. You know,
Yeah.
it seems to be the case that Bernard and IT have some involvement in
Right.
the repression of information, which is, I will say, counterbalanced, or perhaps maybe their perspective is a little steelmanned by the behavior of both Holston and his wife Allison. I mean, they do end up panicking and seeking life outside the silo to their death,
To their
to
deaths.
their deaths.
Right.
And so there's, it on the one hand, while it seems pretty obvious that IT and Bernard in particular, this really cartoonishly villainous character,
Yes.
are at the heart of this kind of broader conspiracy around their prevention from life outside, or seeking life outside the silo. On the other hand, it seems almost justified by what we've seen so far.
Yeah.
Though
It is barren and desolate
Yeah,
out there. So
right.
maybe people shouldn't be trying to go out.
Right.
And we do need to keep them happy, docile, trapped within the silo.
Right.
You know?
That's at least the kind of drama that's being set up so far.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I don't know. I mean, I'm curious. What did you think?
I'm in a similar boat as you.
Yeah.
I think I too am finding it impossible to not compare this to the Silo TV show on Apple TV Plus
Right.
that we talked about in the last episode. It's really tough to go into the book and not immediately start making comparisons. That having been said, I am quite enjoying how plot forward this book is. Things are moving at a very brisk pace, and
Certainly.
we're about to talk about the meta and how this book came together and the author's journey to
Right.
making this book. And once you realize that, it makes a lot of sense why this book moves as fast as it does and
Right.
in the way it does. I'm enjoying that. I'm enjoying the brisk pace of the writing and the storytelling. Things are happening every single chapter. There's a fun central mystery that is starting to sort of unpack in a way where there are just enough questions that make you want to keep reading.
Yeah.
I think the characters are fairly strong,
Right.
and instantly endearing. In particular, I think Holston
Right.
is somebody you immediately want to cheer for.
totally.
He's got a tragic story with
Yeah.
his wife. His wife is cool, and somebody who you want to learn the truth.
Yeah.
And ultimately she doesn't, you know?
Right.
So that tragic backstory is really great
Yeah.
and a powerful way to start the book. Mayor Johns, we spend a lot of time in her thoughts
Yeah.
as we do this journey down the silo.
Yeah.
And I found her growing on me quite a bit.
Yeah.
I will say, I did walk away from these first 17 chapters wishing there was a bit more depth, which is funny to say about a story that takes place underground in a silo. 144 floors of depth, not enough for me, clearly. I like my science fiction to be a little bit more dense.
Sure.
And for a story about people living underground, it is quite surface level.
Sure.
Like, at least in these first 17 chapters,
Yeah.
what you are reading is what you are getting.
Right.
And there's not a ton of like layer and subtext to peel back
Right.
on this onion.
Right.
I actually think that makes it a particularly great starter sci-fi book
Right.
for somebody who isn't super familiar with the genre and is
Yeah.
maybe daunted by something that's as complex and winding and dense as like Three Body Problem, as we covered on the show.
Right.
So I do think the pacing and the like surface level storytelling works in its favor in that sense. It's a
Right.
great entry level book.
Yeah, and I to add to your point, I think this is also where we see some of Hugh Howey's strongest writing. And I think it was just the very first page, even wherein Holston is kind of thinking to himself as he's on what we come to learn is his final, journey up the silo. He's thinking to himself about the railing, that there have been centuries of hands that have rubbed this railing as the people have moved up and down the stairs. And he thinks to himself, quote, "One molecule at a time," he supposed, "each life might wear away a single layer, even as the silo wore away that life." Which, is great. It's a
great
nice
writing.
little
Yeah.
musical bit of writing there. And I think it accomplishes something immediately that I don't think was ever really made clear to me in the show adaptation, which is how long the silo residents have been down there.
Yes.
Which is centuries. There have at least been
generations.
centuries of life in the silo.
Wild.
And we also learn a little bit later that they've only got around they only have around 150 years of recorded history since the last uprising.
Right.
And that was really informative. And it
Yeah.
kind of it impacts my believability of some of the elements of the story, which we'll talk about as we get into some of the leaps of faith that the book asks of us. But I found that this kind of block of chapters is probably Hugh Howey's some of his strongest writing.
Yeah. And it's really this Holston chapter in particular is kind of what got him started down this journey of writing the book, as we'll talk about shortly.
Right.
And so it makes sense that it's such strong writing.
Right.
It easily captured people.
Right.
And they were asking for more, and thus he wrote more.
Right.
To wrap up my impressions, I did want to hit on a couple of other points
Yeah.
very briefly. We talked about the TV show adaptation and our comparisons to it. It's interesting to watch the adaptation first and
Yeah.
then read the book, because what I presume would have been like pretty major plot points,
Yeah.
like Mayor Johns' death,
Yes.
was something that I was just waiting for to happen the whole time.
Certainly. Yeah.
Because of course I had seen it in the
Yeah.
TV show.
Yeah.
I don't know whether that detracts from my enjoyment of it, or
Yeah.
it's just something that's fun to look forward to and see all of the foreshadowing that's placed throughout the
Sure.
book.
Yeah.
You mentioned it earlier. I do agree that the TV show for me still edges out the book. I loved how there were more spider web of mysteries in the
Yeah.
show. And again, we're early in the book. I don't want to pass any judgment
Sure.
on the book yet.
Yeah.
My feelings, I'm sure, will change as we get deeper in.
Absolutely.
But the show, even these first two parts, I feel like the show handled spectacularly.
Oh,
and
yeah.
I was really hooked on
Yeah,
these characters.
Totally. Yeah.
And as I'm reading the book, I'm getting this like funny feeling that I'm reading a SparkNotes summary of the TV show.
Oh.
You know, like
Yeah.
the book is like, which is kind of an inverse feeling to what I'm
Yeah,
used to,
interesting.
because usually
Yeah.
you watch an adaptation and then you
Right.
go read the book and there's like 10x more
Yes.
detail.
Yes. Yeah.
You're like-
You're always disappointed going the other way, obviously.
Always, yeah. And it's funny, I'm kind of feeling disappointed in the inverse
Right,
now.
right.
I loved the TV show,
Right.
and I was very impressed with how much they
Yeah.
crammed into it.
Yeah.
And now that I'm reading the book, I'm kind of like, are we sure we couldn't have added a couple more layers here?
Right,
You
right.
had more time in this book to
Yeah.
explore these characters.
Yeah.
And so I don't know if that feeling will change as we get further into the book.
Yeah.
That's just something I wanted to share that I'm feeling here in just the first 17
Yeah.
chapters.
Yeah.
We'll see if the book gets deeper as we get deeper into this conspiracy.
Yeah.
But I kind of want to applaud the show for
I totally
really
agree.
nailing it.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I totally agree with that. Take. And there are also moments where the show succeeds in some more obvious ways, I would think, like show, don't tell.
Yes.
And part of that is the magic of that medium. That you can do so much with television and film that you obviously cannot do with the written word.
Yeah.
But that said, there are moments where I think they also even improved a bit on the plot and
Yeah,
some of
I
the
agree.
character
Yeah.
depictions. In particular, I do take some objections to the presentation of Bernard, the head of IT in the book.
Yes.
who-
Oh my goodness.
I've said this, but he is cartoonishly
Cartoonish.
and obviously villainous,
Yes.
which is, we're only 20% of the way into this book. And I think the way that the show kind of teases his character out over a little bit longer of an arc.
Yeah.
We don't quite know that he might be nefarious, though there are like some hints in the show for quite a few episodes. I mean, takes us a minute before it's in fact revealed that he's kind of pulling a bit of strings. Whereas in the book, I think around chapter 7 or 8, there's a moment when Bernard is refusing to sign the papers
Yeah.
that the mayor and Marnes have brought, wherein they're nominating the next sheriff. And he says, excuse me, quote, "I won't sign it. The next time I won't ask," Bernard smiled. "You think you'll outlive another sheriff?"
Uh-huh.
He turned toward the workers in the corner and waved one of them over. "Why do I somehow doubt that?" It's like, yeah, exactly.
Why do I somehow doubt that?
Yeah, that is exactly the feeling that you have as you encounter Bernard in this these first 17 chapters. And that I think robs him and us a little bit
I agree.
of a kind of a fun, a fun possible reveal, and as the writing goes, again, show don't tell, and I think
Yeah.
this is where the adaptation does kind of edge out a little bit over the book. I think both are really strong, and that's
Yeah.
my as I wrap up my, I guess, impressions on these first 17 chapters. I'm left pretty satisfied with this fairly light mystery that we've got, and the world building in Silo, and I think the show did a wonderful job, adapting the story.
Yeah, I agree. Even the characterizations,
Yeah.
very quickly, I want to comment on, we got one chapter here, chapter 17,
Yeah.
where Juliet fixes the generator.
Right.
In the TV show, that's a whole episode.
Right.
Fixing the generator
Yes.
is this whole incredible
Yes.
arc of an episode.
Yeah. Yeah. Such a big payoff. So
Such
satisfying.
a big
Yeah.
payoff.
Yeah. Totally.
And what it nails perfectly is the subtext, because the generator,
Yeah.
in Juliet's mind,
Yes.
is her mother,
Right.
is her brother.
Right.
The people
Right.
she couldn't save,
Right.
she now desperately
Right.
will do anything to
Right.
save.
Right.
She's projected, and the book gets at this too.
Yes.
To
Yeah.
be clear,
Yeah. With the
there's like,
incubator and the
with the
yes,
incubator,
yes.
there's like one line that
Yeah.
hints that like Juliet is obsessed with fixing things
Right.
because she could not fix her mother, could not
Yes.
fix her brother
Yes.
from dying.
Yeah.
The show takes that one line about
Yeah.
the incubator
Yeah.
and turns it into one of the best episodes
Yeah.
of the
She
season.
nearly dies.
She nearly
She's,
dies fixing the silo. It's the drama
The water
is so good.
rising, and she's
Ugh.
and she's still holding up the
Yeah.
It's
There's this great fear they
yeah.
add in the TV show, this great fear of drowning because
Yes.
no one like swims in the silo.
right.
There's no lakes.
Right.
So yeah, again, so that's like another example,
Yeah.
in addition to the Great Bernard
Yeah.
example, that Juliet fixing the generator, which is
Yes.
just like one tiny chapter in the
right.
book,
Kind of a throwaway line. Yeah.
and a throwaway line
Yeah.
about why her motivation
Yeah.
to become a mechanic becomes this beautiful arc in the
Yes,
TV show. They
totally.
expand on it in such a great way.
Totally.
And it's, again, as we said earlier, props to the team behind the show.
Yeah. Absolutely.
For picking up on those details and turning them into beautiful storytelling.
Yeah.
Okay, last thing before we take a break
Hit me.
and get into our sci-fi analysis. We got to talk about love.
Mm.
We got to talk about romance.
I wish we didn't have to.
I wish we didn't have to.
Yeah.
My one critique, and perhaps my biggest critique of these
Yep.
first 17
Yep.
chapters,
Yep.
is the awkward romantic moments
Yeah.
between Mayor Johns and Deputy Marnes.
Yeah.
There's so much like hand brushing, fingers brushing.
Mhm.
I love sharing your canteen.
Yes.
It's such a loving gesture. I can't believe they gave us 2 rooms and 2 beds.
Yeah,
I wish
we
we
don't
had
need
one
2.
bed so we
Yeah.
could fuck.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
rather than being endearing,
Yeah.
or rather than being like really fun sexual erotic tension to read and get excited about as a reader,
Yeah. Which is definitely something I want out of my sci-fi.
it becomes really cringy.
Yeah. Yeah.
And like the 10th time their hands brush, I was
Yeah.
like, I fucking get it.
Know. Yeah.
I get it. They're hot for each other.
Right.
Their hands have to stop
Yes.
brushing.
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
That's my biggest critique.
Yeah.
I don't know that Hugh Howey is a particularly strong romance writer. Based on this small pool of 17 chapters, maybe he gets way better later. Who
Right.
knows? But based on this, I think he should not try to write romance. Is my feedback. It
Yeah.
just didn't come off great.
Yeah, and to be fair, and I think this is maybe where we leave this. It feels pretty much like kind of just a plot device. Like I don't find it to be on its own. Like I would never, in isolation, read these chapters and hand them to somebody else and say, read this really sentimental, lovely depiction of
No.
love. Because like that,
Yeah.
you can certainly find that in books, and absent the rest of the context of the novel, sometimes you find really great writing on love and kind of human relationships.
Absolutely. Yeah.
This may not have been that. Maybe it is for some.
Yes.
But I would share that criticism and gripe that it maybe didn't feel like it contributed the most to what is otherwise a pretty solid
Right.
set of chapters here.
Totally agreed. Okay, well, those are the chapter summaries and a bit of our impressions and early thoughts as we get into this book.
Yep.
Let's take a break here, Obsa. Let's breathe. We've traveled a long way down this silo. We need to take a break before we continue.
Yeah.
Don't go anywhere, dear listener. When we come back, we're getting into our sci-fi analysis. We're diving into the meta, we're diving into the dilemma, and we're diving into the leap.
That's right.
See you in a minute.
All right, welcome back. As you all know, I hope this is not our first episode. We are jumping into our sci-fi analysis, and we'll start with the meta.
Yes.
We always like to start a new book by looking into the author a little bit, you know, unpack their background, understand the publication of the novel. And in this case, we've got Hugh Howey's Wool. So
That's right.
Wool is, of course, the first book in the larger Silo series, which consists of the 2 sequel books, Shift and Dust, a few short stories, 3 to be specific, as well as a graphic novel adaptation.
So Wool is actually kind of a success story for Amazon. They really, in all of my research, there was a lot of Amazon touting Wool as a success story for self-publishing, for specifically Kindle self-publishing, because as it turns out, Hugh Howey self-published Wool, specifically part 1, that Holston story, in July 2011 on Amazon's Kindle Direct Publishing system. By October of that same year, by October 2011, Howey was seeing sales spike, and people were clamoring for more Wool for part 2, part 3. And so he delivered. He quickly, back to back, in November, December, January, released part 2, 3, 4, and 5. What we now know as the whole book, the rest of the book. And it eventually got collected into the novel you and I are reading today. This overnight success for Howey led to, honestly, a lot of doors opening up for him. He, for example, the film rights were sold to 20th Century Fox, and Ridley Scott was attached to the project at one point.
I mean, my God, what a come up.
What a come up.
Very cool.
That is very cool. Obviously, that film never came to be. That film does not exist. But later on in 2018, AMC picked up the rights to Wool and announced that they would be releasing a TV show adaptation. Obviously, the adaptation wasn't released by AMC because that project morphed and evolved and ended up moving over to Apple TV Plus, which is the show that you and I watched and talked about in the last episode, which eventually ended up releasing in 2023 as Silo.
12-year journey. I mean, that is honestly pretty dope, I have to say.
It's incredible,
As a huge fan of self-published, authors, this is absolutely a success story. And it's like, I think this is around the same era that, books like, I think Andy Weir's The Martian came out, which was self-published, and a few others.
50 Shades of Grey.
50 Shades of Grey, of course. So yeah, this was definitely kind of a bright spot for those who are interested in, penning their own, own novels on their own.
Yeah.
We should also talk a little bit about Hugh Howey himself. He was born in North Carolina in 1975 to a farmer father and schoolteacher mother. Back when he was 12, he was certain that he wanted to be an author, and here he is, a successful author, which he told to Wired. And he went to college in Charleston, where he studied physics and then eventually switched to English. Pretty cool little bit of a trivia about him. He, prior to finding his breakout success with Wool, had a number of odd jobs. He was a bookstore clerk, a yacht captain.
Same.
Never
catch me on a boat. I'm terrified of boats.
But you'll captain one. And he was also a roofer and an audio technician.
Wow.
So definitely had a lot of, maybe, and he had basically a set of disparate jobs that maybe informed some of his writing, perhaps. And of course, when Wool blew up, he was able to commit full time and has since published over a dozen novels.
Hell yeah.
Which is pretty awesome.
Incredible. What a fun story. That's kind of the dream for all of us, right? We
certainly
create a thing, we put it out there, and it blows up and it makes our whole career.
Right. Yeah.
That practically happened to Hugh Howey.
Yeah.
And what's fun is on his website, he writes that he had 2 goals in life. He's always had 2 goals in life. 1, write a novel. Check.
Oh, yeah.
2, sail around the world. He's really into sailing. That like yacht captaining career coming back. He's really into sailing, and he writes on the website that he is still working on that project. He's gone on a couple of sailing trips from my research, but he has yet to circumnavigate the globe.
Yeah.
Best wishes to him. I hope he does it.
Yeah. It's a pretty ambitious undertaking, I will say.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that
yeah.
sounds like a lot of work.
Yeah. I think he may have learned from the book that this is a pretty big world and you should experience as much of it as you
Yeah.
can, lest you find yourself stuck in a subterranean bunker.
That's right. That's right. Before the silos exist.
That's right. I see here also that we discovered that he explained his thinking
Yeah.
behind Wool in
I
an
thought this was
interview.
a really enlightening quote from him.
Yeah. Quote, when I originally thought of the story, I was dealing with silos. The wall screen was the idea that our information is filtered and what these echo chambers do to our psyche, especially if we're just fed bad news all the time. And so the whole thing is just this metaphor of us living through our screens, not going out and seeing the world, not talking to people we disagree with, not challenging ourselves and our worldviews. So that's absolutely, I mean, it's absolutely captured as we.
And that's captured in the story for sure.
Yeah, already. Absolutely.
Yeah. And it's fun to hear that from the author himself. He's like, this is what I meant
Right.
by the story.
Right.
And to then read the story and be like, I think this is what he meant by it. That's fine. I thought it was cool of him to just share like this is why I wrote this book.
Yeah.
This is what it's about.
Right.
Okay, let's talk about, we're done with the meta here. That's a bit of background on Wool
Yes.
and Hugh Howey. Let's dive into our sci-fi analysis and dig a bit deeper here. Starting with our next segment, the dilemma.
Right.
What is the dilemma, the conflict at the core of this story, and what does it reveal to us?
Yes. So it's established pretty early in the chapters with Holston and his wife Allison and their various flashbacks that, you know, we're living in a silo. And of course, the big question is why? Why are we down here? What is the outside world really like? Is there a conspiracy at play? What happened with these uprisings and why was our entire history purged? So you got a number of kind of early threads to kind of investigate.
Yeah, and I think those are compelling questions. Those are immediately the questions I'm asking as the reader.
Certainly.
And so I hope as we continue on this journey through the book that we get equally compelling answers to some of these mysteries.
Yeah.
I also wanted to comment on this other dilemma that's present throughout the story, in particular with Mayor Johns' chapters, part 2. We get this really great sense of what it feels like to live in the silo.
Yeah.
It's like this pressure cooker feeling at all times.
Right.
It feels like the fucking gasket could blow off.
Yeah.
The lid could blow off this thing at any minute.
Right.
And it's really like Mayor Johns and the sheriff's job and IT's job somewhat.
Hold the line, I guess?
To like hold the line and stop this silo from like blowing up on itself.
Right.
Just because of human nature.
Yeah.
Which I think is really interesting. It's clear that it's really not natural, or at least the book posits that it's not natural for humans to live this way.
Yeah.
To live cooped up underground for centuries.
Yeah.
And despite it being a cardinal sin to talk about the outside, to want to go outside, it's obvious that, like, I don't know, everyone's kind of secretly thinking about it at some point in their lives.
Certainly.
Mayor Johns even thinks about this explicitly on that pit stop to IT. She thinks, quote, "There was this unspoken deadly hope in every member of this silo, a ridiculous, fantastical hope that maybe not for them, but perhaps for their children or their children's children, life on the outside would be possible once again, and that it would be the work of IT and the bulky suits that emerged from their labs that would make it all possible."
Right.
End quote.
Yeah.
And I really liked that idea. That's like a central tension at the core of this story as well, is how do you keep people cooped up like this? And how do you manage the desire to explore, expand, go outside?
Right. I mean, I guess that does then kind of raise this slightly more philosophical question about the kind of nature and role of their pretty autocratic and really strict regime for preventing dissent and asking questions. This is really what causes Allison to rebel most, I think, is just this knowledge or this awareness that information was being kind of kept from them. There was that there are efforts basically to control them. I mean, that's quite evident, and it's also clear that this is part of the trade-off of living in this society with essentially, you know, with the risk at any moment that, you know, apparently a rebellion might form and lead to the death of many members of the silo, IT and other members of the kind of ruling class do have to enact, it seems, some pretty rigorous and kind of strict regimes for control.
Yeah.
And that is a bit of a dilemma, because if this really is the last remnants of society, what are you meant to do? I mean, you want to preserve humanity for as long as possible, and it is a bit of a dilemma that members of say the mayor's office, the mayor herself, the sheriff, they question what they have to do. We
Yes.
hear Marnes talk about this a little bit, in that. Sorry, it was Holston actually talking to Mayor John, saying that even after he knew the rules were built on lies, he continued to enforce them. So they're all kind of under this bit of a tricky tricky scenario where they know they must keep the line, essentially, must hold the line, even if it's built on some apparent lies.
Yeah, that's a great point. And it's almost this larger, do the ends justify the means question.
Right,
If
right.
the end
Right.
goal is for everyone in the silo to go back out into the world,
someday,
what are the means by which we do that?
Right.
And how aggressive, like how far are we allowed to go in service of that goal?
Right.
Before we're like stomping on human rights.
Right.
And
right.
I mean, clearly there's a population control
Yes.
within the silo.
Yes.
And that's very clear both in the TV show where it's a
Yes.
bigger plot point,
Yes.
but in the book as well. It's a
Totally.
pretty big point where
Yeah.
Allison and Holston didn't have children.
Right.
They were only allowed to do so for 1 year because
Right.
there's a lottery system
Right.
for how many kids and when
Right.
you can have kids.
Right.
That sort of thing obviously is like a human rights issue, but in
yeah.
the silo, it's like human rights or survival.
Yeah.
And like that's a very icky
Right.
thing to balance.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
For the people
exactly.
in charge.
Yeah. That tension is I think kind of hangs over this novel. You're constantly thinking about this. Like, do the ends justify? And at times I think you might flip flop on this question as you're
certainly
depending on who you empathize with as you read this novel, of course.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, let's move on to our next segment here, the leap.
Yes.
What is the leap of storytelling, the leap of faith that this tale is asking of us as the reader?
Right. And I think we are of an accord here that it isn't the biggest set of leaps, I don't think.
No, I don't think so.
There is, of course, the initial leap that we believe that society has lived underground for generations.
Centuries. Yep.
Centuries, in fact, as we come to understand. And that they've got most modern comforts, food, water, housing. They're able to get by. There's no survival. There aren't bands of roaming, survivalists or anything along those lines.
Yeah.
There's a moderate amount of peace. There aren't any bandits. But this is a society in which we live underground with all of the implications of that are entailed.
Yeah. And I'm willing to accept that. I grew up playing the Fallout video games with vaults and people living underground. It's not the hardest of sci-fi. Nobody is like Lucy Shin is not out here doing the math on how we're surviving in the the silo.
Right. Showing his work. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, this is softer sci-fi. We're just meant to assume that, sure, they got like hydroponic farms and stuff. So they have fruit and certain animals they can breed and have. There's a mention of a rabbit at one point in the story. So clearly there are some creatures.
Yeah.
And that's fine by me. I have no qualms with that. I'm willing to accept the setting and the story and allow it to take my hand and lead me where it will.
It feels fairly. I want to say likely because that portends terrible things. but we certainly are aware of bunkers. People do have bunkers on this. So yes, if there was some kind of apocalypse level event, then it feels pretty believable that we would go underground, if we couldn't go off the planet, and we so far haven't established life off the planet. So
certainly
it feels like a leap, but a plausible leap for us.
Agreed. However,
yes,
I do want to talk about one particular leap that this novel asks of us that I do take some issue with.
Yeah.
We are told, Obssa, multiple times in these first 17 chapters that everyone who goes out to clean, that is sentenced to death, does so.
Right.
Even if they say they won't. And
Yeah.
many of them say, fuck you, I'm not going to clean.
Right.
You're,
Allison said
you're
that,
sentencing me to death.
Yes. Right.
And yet they go outside and do the very thing they claim they wouldn't.
Right.
And this has seemingly been consistent for, again, generations.
Right. Right.
How like Mayor Johns even is like, I've sent so many people out to clean in my term of office.
Right.
How many people are constantly going out? I was trying to do the math. Holston thinks about how many people he's sent out.
Yeah.
And it's literally like in Holston's career, it's been like every 4 fucking years someone is sent out to clean.
Wow. Yeah.
So this is happening a lot.
Yeah.
And everyone is cleaning?
Right.
I find that a little hard to believe,
Yeah.
especially once we, the reader, are told what Holston sees in the helmet.
Yeah.
Once you get out there and you see this paradise world, why? Why would you then turn around, go back, and slowly start cleaning these fucking cameras?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because by then, presumably, you're outside and you're like, what the
This
fuck?
is completely different.
What?
This isn't a slight bit of grime on the lens of a camera.
Yeah.
You know?
And any logical person would be like, have I been
What?
lied to my whole life?
Yeah. Totally.
What the fuck?
Yeah.
So
of
why
course.
aren't people just being like flipping off the cameras and
Right.
walking away?
Right.
It's a little unbelievable to
Yeah.
me that people are doing their jobs
Yeah.
when they go out there,
Right.
especially when they see this paradise world. It just, I don't know, that feels illogical to me.
Yeah.
Did that strike
No.
similar to you?
Oh, definitely. I basically this is certainly one of the moments where I just suspended my disbelief. But
yeah.
the only kind of explanation that I initially kind of gave it was that they were probably being drugged on the way out, maybe with something that like kind of fills them with euphoria and obedience and something along those lines. But this is me kind of maybe patching what is a bit of a gap in the storytelling,
Yeah.
And I agree. It certainly seems strange that
It seems
this would be people's reactions to
yeah.
to encountering this like very clearly extremely different
Right.
view of the outside world.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It would come as a shock to most people. And I will say, you mentioned euphoria.
Yeah.
There is some hint of that.
Yeah.
Because we do follow Holston as he goes outside and
Yes.
experiences this. We get some insight into what people might be feeling as they
Right.
step outside. And I think euphoria is a great way to describe it.
Yeah.
He is overcome
Right.
with so much emotion.
Right.
I wanted to share this quote that maybe gives us some insight into
Yeah.
this. Quote, he wasn't sure why he was doing it, only that everyone before him had. And look at the secret they all shared. That secret was a powerful drug. He knew only to do what he had been told, to follow the numbers on the pockets,
Right.
to clean mechanically while he considered the awesome implications of an outside world so big one couldn't live to see it all, couldn't breathe all the air, drink all the water, eat all the food.
Right.
End quote.
Yeah.
So that's certainly written as someone who is like overcome with emotion,
Absolutely.
is in
Yeah.
like this euphoric state of mind,
Right.
maybe not thinking straight and operating just mechanically,
Yeah,
doing
right.
what they've been commanded to do.
Yes. Yeah.
Or like what's been ingrained in them for
Right.
generations
Yeah.
by their
Presumably
parents,
whole
by their
life too.
grandparents.
Yeah.
So, sure, I think like that's maybe enough for me to let this slide,
Yeah.
to be like, okay, they're like really overcome with emotion. This is like a wild experience for them.
Right.
And the only thing their brain can think of at that moment is, I guess I should clean, because
Right.
that's the last thing they were told to do.
Yeah.
It's fine. I still find it kind of unsatisfying. It's a little hard for me to believe that every person has felt exactly this feeling
Yeah.
for generations,
Right.
particularly because Holston has other baggage with his wife. Like he's
Totally.
feeling these feelings in a unique context.
Right.
Not every person who went out to clean also had a wife that went out to clean.
Right.
So we also can't take Holston's feelings as template for everything everyone
Exactly.
else felt.
Exactly.
I don't know. That part to me, it starts to stretch the believability of
Yeah.
of this particular situation.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I while I agree with that, I will also say, it was relatively easy for me to personally suspend my disbelief in those particular moments, mainly because it feels like the mystery at the heart of this novel is kind of revealed fairly early on as
Yeah.
like being, a conspiracy on the part of IT. And so I at times was kind of wondering, is there really that, I mean, is there really that much more that I should be kind of looking at as clues,
Mm,
for a greater mystery? And this is one of them that I thought, okay, maybe this is like this is just another, element of IT essentially like weighing, you know, uh, putting their hands on the scales a little bit and influencing people to behave in certain ways, again through
yeah,
drugging or whatever,
yeah.
whatever means. But as I kind of moved on, I kind of assumed that was maybe all that there was to it, and
Right, right.
um,
I think that's fair.
yeah.
And maybe that'll help me sleep easier at night,
Well,
thinking of it. I'm just saying,
yeah.
I'm flipping everyone the bird and walking
100%.
away.
Yeah.
Fuck you and your
Yeah.
cameras and your cleaning. Are you kidding me?
Right. It does make for like a pretty iconic like little image, somebody cleaning the screen. I can see somebody carrying the wool cloth, and obviously it speaks to the title of the the book,
Yeah.
in wool.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's pretty bizarre that's how you would react. Like I would almost totally want to see like a flip off the screen and walk into the
Yeah.
sunset, kind of moment.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's the leap.
Yes.
Let's wrap up today's conversation with our final segment in our analysis, the gadgets.
Yeah.
A lot of sci-fi has technology in it. Silo is no different. Let's talk about the tech and tools we see in
Yes.
the story.
Silo is maybe a little bit different for the genre, perhaps.
Fair.
In that, I don't think we encounter too much tech that we're not familiar with. This,
Yeah.
if anything, feels a little regressive, which is sensible. I mean, it makes sense. There's clearly been a great deal of stagnation as far as technological development, and paper is, kind of a rare commodity. So, I mean, this little bit of kind of exposition around their technological prowess, I think suits a world that is maybe 50 years bygone. Like they
Yeah.
feel like they're a little bit behind where we are today, which again, to speak to suspending disbelief, for centuries underground, for them to not have developed, a little
Yeah.
bit more is
Yeah.
curious. But they do have hydroponic farms and kind of other technologies that are essential for survival. Like they've got essentially all the technologies that we encounter here are tuned to survival, pure
Yes,
survival,
pure
which
survival.
makes sense.
Yeah. Very few things here for pleasure,
Yeah,
No mentions of a spa.
right.
no mentions of a bathhouse or anything.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, it's all tuned towards survival. And you're right, it feels like it is frozen in place.
Yeah.
Which does stretch the imagination
Little
because
bit.
for centuries, you're telling me nobody invented like a new way to make a thing for survival. But that does lead me back to the conspiracy.
Yeah.
Because that makes me wonder, okay, why is the technology intentionally being kept stagnant as a means of control?
Right.
As part of this conspiracy,
Right,
as a
right.
means of keeping people docile and
Right.
keeping people from rebelling, from
Right.
uprising,
Right.
from thinking they should be thinking outside the bounds. Obviously, the entire idea of allowing new technology also allows the proliferation of new thoughts.
Yeah.
And
Good
in a
point.
society where you don't want people thinking
Yes,
weird new
yeah.
things,
Got a thought police.
gotta thought police
Yeah,
them.
that's right.
So it does make me wonder if the technology that's on display
Yeah.
so far in the book is also wrapped up in the conspiracy.
Yeah, just reinforcing it. Yeah.
And I mean, I will admit a reason I think that is because this was played up quite a bit in the TV show.
Yes.
In the show, for example, certain technologies that are pre-silo
Yes.
artifacts,
Yes.
um,
Totally forbidden.
totally forbidden.
Yes,
You
yeah.
know, anything that's discovered
Yeah.
is
Highly illegal.
Highly illegal, is
Yes.
immediately taken in.
Yes.
Don't talk about it.
Right.
People are like keeping certain artifacts secret from the police.
Yeah.
And
Even things like children's books, like I
yeah,
think a Fez dispenser.
Yes.
Like in the, it's things that are totally otherwise innocuous. In the show are certainly heightened. This like kind of a risk with possessing them is pretty severe.
yeah, yeah. And we don't, at least in these first 17 chapters, there's no hint of that.
No. In fact, at some point, I think Juliet references like a children's book that she has,
Yes.
which in the show was a very dangerous
grave
art.
offense.
Yeah, yeah, and
Yeah. And she also references the watch she wears on her
Right.
wrist, which again in the show
yes,
is like really skirting the line of an illegal artifact.
Right.
Like she should really not wear that
Right,
if she
right,
doesn't
right.
want to get in trouble.
right,
It's a throwaway line in the book.
yeah,
So I'm not sure. I'm not sure if we'll get that in the book as we keep reading.
Right.
Will artifacts and their illegal nature be more important?
Right.
Is the technology being suppressed? Or are we to just assume like survival at all costs has led technology to just kind of stagnate
Right.
for centuries?
Right.
I mean, it's clear that a lot of the technology we do see, maybe it's not clear. Maybe this is me projecting a little bit, but it seems like a lot of it is like pre-silo.
Right.
Like the founders of the silo made this shit and we're just maintaining it.
right, right,
The
right,
generator in particular.
Right.
It's just something we're just fixing every time it
right,
breaks.
right. No innovation.
No innovation is
Right.
happening. No
Right.
iteration is happening on
Yeah.
these things. And, that could be intentional. That could just be the nature of surviving on the brink like this
Right.
for a dystopian society.
That's good observations.
Okay. Last thing we want to do. We like to end our episodes on comments, observations,
Yeah.
questions from our listeners.
Yeah, I mean, a
Because,
couple of great
again,
ones, yeah.
This is a book club.
Of course.
So we have two here we wanted to share today.
Yeah. First up, we got this lovely email from Ben Courtney sharing their excitement for our Woolen Silo coverage. Quote, "So excited for you guys to do Silo, one of my favorite stories of the last decade or so. This will be the first book you've covered that I've read on my own beforehand, so I'm excited to experience this a bit differently than all the other titles thus far. I often recommend Wool to people who aren't super into sci-fi,
Hey.
as it can definitely be sold as more of a mystery or thriller, as opposed to something like, of course, The Three Body Problem. I bumped against the show a bit because it's so different from the books, but listening to your review really makes me want to go back and give it another shot. Would be great timing with season 2 set to come out soon. Thanks for spreading the positivity. Won't say anything further on Wool, won't spoil the ride for you, but I would like to give a shout out to the second book in the series, Shift. Definitely recommend getting to that one, even if you don't cover it on the pod."
Wow.
That's
Ben,
pretty
what a
nice.
lovely email.
Yeah,
Thank you.
That's pretty great.
Okay, next up, the other message we want to share is from Shifty in our Discord. Shifty is reading the book before watching the TV show and hilariously ended up basically predicting the first episode of the TV show. Shifty wrote in Discord, quote, "I'm about 150 pages in so far, and this book reads unusually well. Like I'm having no problem visualizing the setting and characters.
Yeah.
I haven't watched Silo yet, but it feels like they wouldn't need to stray far from the book to make a very good show. The Holston part could easily be one very heartbreaking episode to open the show." That's right, Shifty.
Nicely
Ideally, with a well-known actor playing Holston to throw you off. I definitely read it thinking he'd be a main character or that he'd survive once he went outside.
done. Yeah.
End quote.
Great observations there.
That is, light spoiler, the first episode is Holston's journey. The first
That's
episode
right.
is exactly what you think it
You
is,
called it.
Shifty.
You called it.
it.
Yeah.
Great job.
Absolutely.
And I agree. I think Holston is such a strong character, and you watch the show or you read the book thinking like, oh, hell yeah, I'm ready to follow this sheriff
Yes.
to the ends of this. Oh, shit, this episode.
Yeah.
It's a great plot twist and a strong way to start the book. And I hope, Shifty, that you will watch Silo.
Yeah.
And I hope you'll
Share
be
your thoughts.
share your thoughts with us,
Yeah.
please. And Shifty, as well as all of our listeners, I hope everyone will be joining us for coverage of season 2
That's
of
right.
Silo, which comes out soon, and we will be talking about it on this show.
Most certainly. All right. For the next episode, listeners, make sure you've read through chapter 52.
What?
Just a little bit longer than this first episode, which will take you through the end of part 4. Definitely sounds like a lot of reading, but the chapters are relatively short.
Yeah, it's
The
great.
pacing is really great. And you can, of course, find our entire schedule for the rest of this season in the show notes.
That's right. And that's it, Obssa. That's it for today's episode. Friends, listeners, we'll have Sims top up your canteens and see that you have enough food to power your decrepit fingers so that you can leave us a review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify.
And be sure to check the other shows on the Lore Party Podcast Network on loreparty.com. You can also follow us on Twitter and Instagram, both at lore_party. You can also watch video versions of these episodes. That's right. Hopefully you are, in fact, on the Lore Party YouTube channel. Thank you so much for listening. And remember, knowing the truth is always good. And better that it's us discovering it than someone else. Right?
Right?
I think so.
Yeah.
Probably.
Yeah. We should be the arbiters of truth.
Can't disagree.